What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Variant the Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Arris Quinones, accompanied by Tim Connolly. And today, we're going to talk about an episode we recently did on our YouTube channel, the 10 Smartest Humans in the Marvel Universe.
Yes.
Look at that. You like that, Tim? Like the way I said that? The Marvel Universe.
It was very smarmy. It's like the Marvel Universe.
But no, a few weeks ago, we did the same thing for the DC Universe, and then we came here on the podcast and talked about it. So we figured, why not do that again for the Marvel Universe and, stay in line with our pattern that we're making here.
Yeah, because we blew up both lists and we parted ways with the actual publisher on both lists. So it's only fitting that we come on and explain ourselves in greater detail this time as well.
Well, this one specifically, too, because I don't know about you, but reading the comments, I feel like this one was a lot more controversial than the DC one we did. There was a lot more of people being like, disagreeing or being like, this person should have made the list or that person should have made the list, which always happens. But I felt like this one was, again, a lot more controversial than our DC one just because there was lots of characters that could have been on the list or, the people thought that should have been on the list that we were like, no. But that's why these are kind of fun, right?
Yeah.
It's this stuff like this, we always say it in the episodes. It's not like concrete. A lot of it is kind of, personal opinion and, how much you followed a character or so this year's and what you think. Because these aren't real characters, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and we even differed from Marvel's official list just because we were like, no, especially with number one. I gotta be a little honest. Number one, I was like, I kind of laughed. I'm like, no, not today, Marvel, not today.
Yeah, I saw it, and I had the exact same reaction. It's just like, and we'll get into that. We'll get into that overall as to why. But
right.
I would say with this list more so than the DC, and I think that's why you're seeing more of a reaction to our Marvel list than the DC list, is because our Marvel list parted ways on a much greater level with Marvel than we did with DC. We had a difference of opinion with DC on several, but there was a lot that was very similar or the same, where we agreed. But this one, the list is entirely different.
Although I do think it's funny, for both lists, we parted ways on number one. Like we didn't agree with either of them on number one, which is like the big one, right? Because it is the smartest person. So I think that's really interesting that for both lists, we're like, yeah, I know DC and Jeff Johns said this, or yeah, I know Marvel said this, but we're gonna say this.
Yeah,
And
just to put it in context, okay. So let's put it in context right out of the gate, and we will give you the 10 smartest human characters that Marvel under Marvel continuity. Okay, so this is who Marvel says are the smartest characters in the Marvel universe. Okay, so number 10 for Marvel is T'Challa.
Right.
Number 9 is Amadeus Cho. Number 8 is Henry McCoy. Number 7 is Riri Williams. Number 6 is Hank Pym. Number 5 is Valerie Richards. Number 4 is Bruce Banner. Number 3 is Tony Stark. Number 2 is Reed Richards. And number 1 is Lunella Lafayette, or as most people know her, Moon Girl.
Right.
Okay, now notice right off the bat who's missing from that list.
Which is really, really weird.
Which is super bizarre. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, obviously I'm talking about Dr. Doom, Victor Von Doom.
For sure.
Okay, so he's not even on their list, to which both Arris and I say, no.
Well, because
disagree.
The thing, and right off the bat, a lot of, if you've read Marvel for any, good amount of time, you'll know that he rivals Reed Richards.
Absolutely.
Like, who, spoiler for the list, who on our list was number one. And many people would agree. It's Reed Richards. I mean, the guy could basically solve anything if given the time. I mean, he's Reed Richards,
Yeah.
like he's one of the few people who could like stump like Tony Stark and characters of like that level of intelligence. You know what I mean? That's kind of like, yeah, he's stretchy and stuff, but that's like kind of his whole thing.
Exactly,
like even
yeah.
before he got his powers and stuff, he was a genius. So it's not even so much like, he has this super intellect where it kind of like it's his superpower. It's just like, oh no, he's just really smart. You know what I mean? So I think that just says so much. But also it's kind of funny that there was a lot of characters on Marvel's list that were like newer, and it was kind of our argument that they were newer and they didn't have that much of a backlog to prove why that character is smart or smarter than this person or that person.
Right.
It was just kind of like, oh, we're creating this character and going to make this character the smartest person, and just because we're Marvel and we could do that. And since we say it and we make the books, that's going to be so.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like, sure, obviously you're Marvel, you do whatever you want. But as a reader and fan, I'm like, yeah, but that's not going to fly with me in that sense. You know what I mean? It's like, because you just, I don't know. I feel like you can't just do that, especially when people have been reading like people like characters like Fantastic Four, Reed Richards for years and years. You can't just expect us to accept that just because you say it. At least, and if you're gonna do it, you have to do it in a way to where like embed it in the mythology and stuff in such a way where it's like where you could swallow it a little easier. You'd be like, oh, okay, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, I mean, ultimately, for me, what it boils down to, and it's kind of what you're alluding to a little bit, is there's no depth or examples to draw from, or at least nothing that is of significance. Whereas you have all of these other characters, i.e., you know, like for instance, we see a Hank McCoy on here, or Henry McCoy, the Beast, who wasn't on our list. He didn't make our top 10, but at least he's got this really long history, right? He's got this depth of you know, storylines and you know, feats that you can point to where he displayed his intelligence on all of these instances across multiple storylines and situations in the comics, to where you can point to, and he was under consideration. The reason we ultimately didn't go with him is because our list was human. And you know, he does have mutations, so he's human, but he's not. So
that was my biggest thing. People were even commenting on the thing, and I'm like, I get it, because it's kind of a gray area where it's like, yeah, he's human, but he's not. He's a mutant. You know what I mean? Mutants are like technically humans, but they're mutants. Hence, he looks like a blue bear, essentially. You know what I mean? And he's like, that's not human.
That doesn't necessarily affect his intelligence per se. In other words, he's not an alien that has, you know, otherworldly intelligence or anything to that effect.
For sure.
But you know, there was a consideration, and ultimately we wound up taking him off this particular list. But you know, you have other characters like Riri Williams, Amadeus Cho, Valerie Richards, and for us, most importantly, what they consider their number one, just by, you know, dictatorial fiat, basically, and declaration, they're just saying like, Lunella Lafayette, Moon Girl, here she is. She's introduced to you. By the way, she's the smartest character in all of the Marvel universe. And it's like, okay, but why? How do we know that? Like, what has she done that can display that? She's done, you know, she's a cool character and she's got some cool feats or whatever, but it's nothing that you would point to and say, okay, well, that is clearly smarter than, say, a Reed Richards or a Dr. Doom or a Tony Stark or whatever. You know, there's just no depth there. So you just have to go based on just because Marvel said so. And that's you know, from a story perspective, from a fan, one that's boring, incredibly lame and boring to do. And second, you know, there's no discussion to be able to have there to compare and contrast. There's nothing to draw from. So it's just like, no, until you give us reason to be able to compare and contrast her to these other characters that have these huge, you know, wildly deep backstories and histories and all of these feats to back up, you know, why they're considered, you know, some of the most intelligent. But until then, she's got to, you know, she's going to ride the bench and wait her turn, you know, until she can show us more.
For sure. Yeah. It's one of those things where like, sure, you know, because she's not even, you know, that well known or popular of a character too, right? So because of that, she's only, you know, she's not had nearly as many of appearances. You know what I mean? I would even say she's kind of an obscure character. Not like if you go up to people, they're not gonna. You say Moon Girl, they'll be like, What's that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where you say Fantastic Four, Wolverine, any of these characters, even you know, Dr. Doom, everyone's gonna know who that is. And I'm not saying we should judge it purely on popularity, but that does speak to the fact that clearly she doesn't have that vast of a history or instances that can prove she is smarter than X, Y, and Z. Yes, Marvel Comics has done a few stories and instances where they contrasted her with Reed Richards, and she's even appeared in comics with him and stuff in the past. But going back to our point, I still think that stuff is like too soon. For me, just as a fan, I'm just like, no, it's still, you know, Reed Richards. Like everyone, you ask any comic book reader who like, name me 5 of the smartest people, you know, in the Marvel universe, you know, human or alien, Reed Richards is probably going to be on one of the 5 they mentioned, just like that. Like him and Tony Stark will instantly be like 2 of the ones they mentioned. So Moon Girl doesn't have that. So I'm not saying just because she's not a known character doesn't mean she's not. It's just, again, it's like one of those things where she just doesn't have enough backstory. You know what I mean? It's a weird thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's just it's kind of a tricky situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the best, let's go over our list.
Yes.
And then we can kind of break down, why everybody landed versus, and one of the characters that I will say that was, it was the closest to landing on our list and ultimately got nudged out at the last minute is Amadeus Cho.
Yes.
And he was going to be our number 10.
I was going to say he was on the original, because
yes,
a little behind the scenes action.
Yeah.
He was on our first draft of the list we made up.
Exactly right.
He was number 10.
And in the end, he got bumped, for our number 10, which is Valerie Richards. And, everything that we just said about why we didn't add certain characters, all of that was considered. And so she almost didn't make the list. What was the linchpin at the end that said, okay, she's got to at least land at number 10 is the fact that Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic himself, said in a comic that he believed that she was surpassed him in intelligence by the age of 3.
Right.
So even though we don't have all of, we don't have all of the feats and we don't have this depth of backstory to go off of and build, a real case for her. The simple fact that he said that, she just had to at least land at the 10 spot to say, okay, he said this, so clearly she's amongst the most intelligent, and it's just a matter of time before she has the feats to back it up.
It's one of those things too that makes you think, like, if with him saying that, it's almost like, well, I mean, if he's saying that and he's number 1, that kind of sort of makes her a contender for number 1 as well in a weird way, right?
Absolutely.
It's like if he's saying his daughter is going to surpass him and he's number 1, clearly that means one day she'll be number 1. You know what I mean? So, and
on many lists, she is in the number 1, number 2 spot. Not with Marvel, but with other people. And many people's lists, you will see Valerie up there, in the top 2, top 3. But next on our list at number 9, we had Adam Brasher, Blue Marvel. And this is like, and we said it in the episode, this is like by far as powers go, this is probably the most powerful, individual character on our list. Right there with Dr. Doom. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah. He's like one of those characters that, again, I haven't read much Blue Marvel and stuff growing up, and definitely not recently.
Right.
But what I have read, he's super interesting because, I know enough about him to know that, like, I mean, we said it in the episode, like, he is up there with the likes of, like, Sentry and Hyperion and stuff like that. He's basically, like, another version of Superman for Marvel, right?
Right.
Like, he would be in the league with, like, Shazam, Superman, Martian Manhunter, Sentry, Hyperion, like, all those guys. Like, if there was, like, a triple threat match, a tag team triple threat match or something like that, it would be like Blue Marvel, Sentry, Hyperion versus Shazam, Superman, and Martian Manhunter, right?
Right.
So what's fascinating about him though is the fact that he's so intelligent, but he's also has the strength and power of the likes of, like, again, Superman. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, imagine, because we say it all the time in shows. We're like, it's not so much, your strength that makes you powerful. It's oftentimes just your intellect. Because if you could outsmart someone or manipulate something, you're gonna come out on top. You know what I mean? But this guy has the intellect on top of being essentially a god in the sense of strength. Right. That's like someone like you never want on your bad side.
No.
Hence him being on the list.
Exactly. Yeah, and he started out with the brains, not the brawn.
Right. Yeah.
And it was actually his brains that led to him getting these powers when he was building the negative reactor that exploded.
See, point in case.
Exactly. Yeah. So he specializes in antimatter and all this kind of stuff, and that's how he gained his power. But you rarely actually see him on the list of Marvel's most intelligent, and I personally don't understand how you exempt him. There's a lot. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of characters inside the Marvel universe that are like right there, like they're very close to each other in terms of intelligence and even feats to back it up. But he just in terms of the type of sciences he deals in, but also the fact that he's partnered with other characters to create just incredible otherworldly devices and so forth. And then you mix that with, how he's used his intelligence combined with his now powers. It's from my view, and I know yours, it's hard to leave him off the list.
For sure. 100%.
But he actually replaced on Marvel's list, which is at number 9, which is Amadeus Cho. So Amadeus Cho, we had him in consideration for number 10, and for us, but Marvel has him at 9, and we've got Adam Brasher, Blue Marvel there.
Mm-hmm. Which there was one that was really hard for me that I don't know. I want to say if I regret not putting it on the list, but it's kind of a really obvious one. Is Peter Parker Spider-Man, right? Because Peter Parker has often been compared to Tony Stark, and you even see it in the MCU. Like, you know what I mean? Like literally in Far From Home, he's full on like, you know, building a suit and being like Tony Stark, and even, you know, Happy Hogan and stuff like that, or Happy rather, is just looking at him and like, wow, you kind of remind me you're like the next Tony.
Right.
But in the comics, it's like that, you know, a lot. Peter is incredibly intelligent. There was a while in the comics where he basically became like, you know, an Iron Man in the sense where he made his own, you know, he had his own like tower and corporation, and he was making his own suit and all that stuff. So that's kind of one I feel like it's just really hard when you're trying, because these universes like Marvel and DC, there is so many characters, and there are characters with like, you know, with Tony Stark and Bruce Banner and Peter Parker and all these characters that have been around since like, you know, the 50s and 60s and all that stuff. It's just really hard to whittle it down. So a lot of the time it's just kind of like you're almost like just you know, flipping a coin and being like, well, I got to get rid of one of these characters. So you know what I mean? So
yeah, it really does boil down to the reasoning, right? It boils down to the reasoning and the logical you know, reasoning behind, you know, okay, what places this character over this one? Is there any instances where they had the edge, a significant edge over this other character, or are there feats that they have, you know, exhibited that just supersede, in the end, you feel just supersede this character or that character? And for me, the reason that, you know, he ultimately didn't land on the list is the fact that you have so many characters that have, you know, let's say, for instance, the one that for me was one of the ones where I was just like, okay, could that be swapped out with a Peter Parker, let's say, is with Moira McTaggart, right? That would be an example of like two characters, like, well, which one of these two is greater? She landed in our number 8 spot. But then you look at it, and it's like, this is a person who not only specializes in mutant genetics, but she has literally been the go-to doctor for, you know, Professor X and the X-Men, and has cured diseases that threaten to wipe out the entire human race.
Legacy virus, anyone?
Yeah, exactly. Like not just humanity, but mutant population, humanity, basically all living things on the planet. And she has just, over the years, she has just on multiple occasions shown incredible things. And now most recently in Jonathan Hickman's X-Men run, she's just been reimagined and has been made even more powerful, and actually a mutant herself. So, you know,
which I don't know how I feel about that.
I don't
by
either.
the way, like, it's like, I think people know by now, if they've been watching and listening to the show for any good amount of time, I'm kind of a purist when it comes to a lot of this stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I just don't want to let go. I'm like, hey, but because she has such a rich history with the X-Men and even like the New Mutants, right? She's very closely tied. She's actually a big reason of why the New Mutants were formed. Right. You know, she was straight up basically told Xavier like, hey, I need you to take in this student, because if not, she's going to end up in the Hellfire Club or, you know, with Magneto somewhere. So I need you to reopen your school, because at the time school was shut down. I need you to reopen your school and take in this girl who would later become Karma and all that stuff. But like, point is, like, she was literally there with the X-Men. She basically helped form the New Mutants. So she is right there.
Yeah, it's really interesting because she is, you know, she not only is she an expert on mutant genetics, but her expertise on the manipulation of mutant genes and figuring out, you know, what makes mutants tick and so forth, it is right there and kind of rivals almost Mr. Sinister in some ways.
Yeah.
Mr. Sinister is, you know, was considered, and we say it in the episode, is considered one, you know, the most intelligent mind of his generation, which is, you know, back in the early 20th century, and was even, you know, exploited and, you know, was approached by Apocalypse, for crying out loud.
I think that says the most right there, though. Like,
yeah.
To you know, compare her to someone like Mr. Sinister, Nathaniel Essex, where the sex is free. it just says so much because, Apocalypse, it's freaking Apocalypse. Like you don't know, you don't read the X-Men and not know who freaking Apocalypse is. You know what I mean? I think he's again one of those villains that just, Joe Blow off the street be like, yeah, I've heard of that guy, Marvel, right? But he's essentially a god and one of the strongest villains in all of the X-Men and or Marvel universe. And so much so he went to Sinister to be like, hey, I could use your genius. So for, McTaggart to be compared to Sinister says a lot just in that comparison alone. You know what I mean? And at the time, she wasn't even a mutant when, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
With all this brilliance and stuff. So that says even more. Well, I guess to be fair, Sinister wasn't really at the time either got his powers through Apocalypse, but that's neither here nor there. I love how I kind of debunked my own point.
Yeah, well done. But yeah, I completely agree. And in the end, that was really the reasoning. Is how close she was in comparison to Mr. Sinister, and Mr. Sinister, who again is another character that is often, or I would say too often, left off of lists of the most intelligent characters in the Marvel universe. And again, you're talking about a character who is single-handedly responsible for many of the mutants' existence in the X-Men universe, especially when you consider what Jonathan Hickman has added to his mythos in the latest run. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a really, not just powerful, but just a genius mind that you're comparing her to, and that she in some ways rivals. So that was the major consideration right off the bat, and why she landed at number 8 for us.
For sure. And again, it's kind of crazy, just to reiterate one more time, how such, a crucial and important character to the X-Men universe gets left off, a list like that, you know what I mean? Where she is a staple, and again, responsible for the New Mutant team. Well, one of the characters responsible for the formation of the New Mutants and stuff like that. So really, really weird, but she's on our list.
Yeah, she's on our list. And she's followed, as we just said, she's followed up at number 7 with Mr. Sinister. So they're on our list. They actually were back to back, and for many of the same reasons. It's just the type of intelligence that they've displayed in the X-Men universe, and the things that they're responsible for. Particularly Mr. Sinister's, his manipulation of the mutant genes and his knowledge of genetics that went to the point to where he literally had a god being like, "Hey, I could use your help with a few things."
Yeah, for sure. For all the the reasons we just compared. Mora for Sinister is why he's just one notch above her, because I mean the fact that just alone that someone like Apocalypse is like, hey, I need your genius, I think that's really all you have to say. It's one of those things where do I really have to explain this anymore? You know what I mean? If you don't get it by that statement alone, you're just not gonna get it.
Yeah, and one of the, I think personally, Mr. Sinister is already a really cool character. And then in the more recent, Powers of X and, House
he scared me as a kid.
Did he really? Is it the clown?
Yeah.
Is it
you know what it is? Yeah, it's because of the X-Men animated series, he looks just like he does in the animated series, like he does in the comics. But it just the white face paint and then the red lips. He just looked like a clown demon. He was Mr. Sinister. His name says it all. He literally was just he was one of those villains that I was like, oh yeah, I don't want to see you at night. I don't want to see you in my closet. That would suck. You know what I mean? Yep. So I remember having his action figure and stuff, and I liked him, but I remember being like, you scary, Mr. Sinister.
I mean, he is. I never looked at him as scary, but maybe because I was older than you at the time. But he's a very cool looking character.
For sure.
So I do really like him just in general. I think he's got a really dope look. But in the more recent, issues with Jonathan Hickman, where they show him, his history, and he's added to his history of him harvesting mutant DNA and manipulating the genetics and creating hybrids and all kinds of things. I mean, just next level. So he took the place on our list. Him and Moira McTaggart. At 7 and 8 took the place of Henry McCoy, or Beast, and Riri Williams, who is not on our list at all for some of the reasons that we talked about before. At number 6 on Marvel's list, which is Hank Pym for them, he's higher on our list.
Yes.
And their number 10, T'Challa, is actually our number 6.
Black Panther.
The Black Panther himself, the man. And a lot of people, this might shock a lot of people, but we even say it in the episode, it should not. It should not surprise anyone. He is the leader of the most technologically advanced nation on the planet in Marvel Comics.
Which that right there is like, I feel like that's another obvious. I think maybe after like the MCU movies and stuff like that, more people realize that because that's really emphasized in the MCU. So hopefully,
I don't know, because they even in the MCU they show a lot of the technological advancements being done by like Shuri and some of the others.
Yeah, I mean,
they do reference him, building some things, but they're not really emphasizing it a ton.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. It's for me though. Like when you say like leader of the most like advanced like nation in the world, I automatically assume I'm like, oh, well, because of his lineage and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, well, then this guy's got to be smart, right?
Right.
Like,
right.
But I guess to be fair, thinking, yeah, Shuri is definitely the one who has all the knowledge in the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
That is like she's the one who comes up with all the tech, all his costumes, yada yada yada. But I don't know. In the comics, though, he is freaking a genius.
Absolutely,
which makes sense. Which makes all the sense in the world. Again, for all the reasons we just said. I mean, like if you're leading this most advanced nation in the world and you're going to lead it properly, you kind of have to know a little bit of what's going on with your history and tech, right?
Yeah, it's just common sense, really.
Yeah. So you can't lead and be this awesome king without knowing a little bit about your nation and all of its tech.
Yeah, and in the comics, I mean, he's just a master engineer, inventor. He's responsible for all kinds of the technology that you see throughout Wakanda in the comics. He designs many of his own, weapons and his suit. Don't get me wrong, Shuri is like also shown in the comics, and she's a genius. But he just has a much longer history of, just being an absolute, brilliant mind. And he actually partnered with some of the other members of the Avengers to create some incredible tech as well. So he has a really long, and I think we both thought that he deserved, a nice, sweet spot on our list.
It's pretty crazy to me. I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, dang, man, the Avengers got Black Panther, the Hulk, aka Bruce Banner, Tony Stark, Iron Man, and Hank Pym, aka Ant-Man, all in the same. Those are like 4 of all 4, which are on our list, by the way. They have 4 of the most brilliant minds on Earth on one team.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
What Earth's mightiest heroes, anyone?
And honestly, that's what made I would say the top 6 of this list was really hard.
Yes.
Because they're all so smart. Because with Black Panther, let's say, T'Challa, it's not just his knowledge of science. He's also got this mastery of alchemy, with like the Black Panther serum.
Right.
He has this mastery of alchemy and chemistry that he merges, and he has this shadow physics that he's developed and all this kind of stuff. So he's got like a mystical knowledge,
for sure,
or a knowledge of mystical sciences also that he combines with that. So it's like you partner him up, like right next to people like Bruce Banner and stuff like that. And it's just like, man, once you get into that top 6, it starts getting really tough.
For sure.
But ultimately, the top 5, it was like, okay, these guys got to go in the top 5. So he landed at number 6.
I feel like once like the first like the bottom 6, I feel like that one, well, I don't know. Some of them were pretty close, like Essex and Moira McTaggart. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I feel like once you get to the top 4, I should say, I think it gets a little easier because I think, because the next one on our list, number 5, is Bruce Banner, the Hulk, right? But I think that one's really close. I think that's really close with him and Black Panther. Mm-hmm. But I think when we get to 4, who I'm not going to name just yet, but when I think we get to number 4, I feel like number 4 to 6 rather is a way bigger like gap, which obviously makes sense because they're getting farther and farther apart on the list. But I feel like it's really justified. You know what I mean? Like once we get to the 4, I feel like the spread becomes greater and greater.
There was one in the top 4 that I really struggled with, and we'll get to it when we get there. But
okay.
Yeah, number 5. Number 5 at Bruce Banner. My boy Bruce Banner Hulk. You know how I feel him. I've got a very special place in my heart for Bruce Banner Hulk. But he is right there with, the top 5. It's very small differences until you really get to the top 2. But he's just a brilliant mind. You really don't even need to break it down very much. He's just a brilliant mind overall, brilliant biologist, engineer, scientist of many masteries and field in various fields or whatever. But obviously his expertise mostly is on gamma radiation. Just a brilliant guy. And by comparison, on Marvel's list, Valerie Richards is actually number 5. And we've got Bruce Banner there. So, and for all the reasons we've already said, but the next one is where we've got at number 4 is where we've got Hank Pym.
Well, I will add, I feel like that, with the Hulk, obviously, as expert in gamma radiation and all that fun stuff, expert scientist, mathematician and all that good stuff. But will say, I think there's a pretty good spread between him and number 4, Hank Pym. I don't think they're actually really close. I think it's very just that Hank is sitting pretty above Bruce Banner. I know you love the Hulk, but I think he more than deserves to be above Bruce Banner.
I don't disagree. He in terms of actual feats and things that he's accomplished. Right. And there's one thing, and for me, it's the reason why he's at number 4 and not number 5, and these two are reversed. There's only one thing for me that separates them, and it's the creation of Ultron, but also the discovery of the microverse, the macroverse. Yeah, but
the ability to grow and shrink things.
Yeah, but for me, that one wasn't as big a consideration for one main reason, is that he didn't discover it through, in other words, he didn't scientifically discover it from the sense of he hypothesized it and then discovered it. It was the other way around. He stumbled upon the Pym particle in his work, found the Pym particles, and then when he shrunk down, he discovered the micro and the macroverses through shrinking and growing.
Yeah, but that's all him.
No, I totally
without
agree.
him doing that's all him.
What I'm saying is one thing led to the next. It wasn't through scientific deliberation that he hypothesized, oh, there is a microverse and I'm going to prove it. You know what I'm saying?
I guess, but some of the best discoveries and inventions have been by accident.
No, there's no doubt.
The atom bomb, anyone?
There's no doubt. I guess what I'm saying is that if Bruce Banner had discovered the Pym particle and shrunk down, what I'm saying is I think he's intelligent enough to also have discovered the micro and macroverse. Whereas Bruce Banner has no expertise per se in AI and creating the kind of tech, at least not to that extent of Ultron, even though in the MCU they tried to make it seem like he did.
For sure.
He doesn't have as extensive, even though he's created a lot of tech in comics, which we even address in the episode. But he hasn't created anything like an Ultron.
Yeah, to your point, I do think that is what makes him more intelligent in that sense. His mastery of AI, because not just even Ultron and all that stuff. He's done that also led to the creation of Vision, another member of the Avengers. So without Hank Pym, all the, no Ultron, no Vision and all that stuff. So, as we know, artificial intelligence is a scary thing, and him being a master of that is pretty crazy, but also speaks to how it kind of makes you a god in a sense, right? If you can create something that is able to learn and maybe possibly become smarter than you, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's weird to kind of think of it that way. So I'm not saying he's a god, but I mean, the guy is so smart, he's kind of creating life in a way, right?
Yeah. I mean, certainly a lot of the scientists now would agree with that statement, But yeah, Bruce Banner has never shown any kind of an ability to create tech on that level of intelligence in terms of the AI side. And the spread of expertise and masteries in terms of fields between that Hank Pym exhibits between his biochemist experience and what he did with the Pym particles and all of that. And his mastery of the creation of AI and things like that, the nanotech and so forth. That spread is what really differentiated him from Bruce Banner for me. So yes, I agree that they are properly placed.
Indeed.
Indubitably. and just to compare and contrast again, at number 4 on Marvel's list is Bruce Banner. So Hank on Marvel's list, Hank Pym is actually at number 6. And number 4 is Bruce Banner. So even Marvel thinks that Bruce Banner is smarter than Hank Pym. So there you go.
But as we learned, we can't trust their
list.
We
can't trust your judgment, Marvel. Your reasoning is flawed, but don't be mad at me.
But that moves on to number 3.
To our top 3, yeah.
Which, of course, leading off the top 3 is none other than Tony Stark, Iron Man himself. And this one, I feel like we've said this a few times already, but duh. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He is Iron Man, Tony Stark. He's the guy who can make an armor for any situation, or even just tech and just weaponry and machinery for anything he wants, pretty much. The guy is so brilliant, he can make armor to fight the likes of like the Hulk.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
With his Hulkbuster armor. And he could, with his brilliance, he could do a ton of good in the world, which he does as an Avenger, or if he chose to, he could do a lot of bad in the world. But he's a genius engineer, mechanic, mathematician, like pretty much anything. He's anything of knowledge in that sense of engineering and machinery, he's a master in, hence, him having an armor for any situation.
Yeah, and honestly, this is the one that I struggled with, that I referenced before.
Really?
What
Why?
I struggled with was him not being higher on the list. And we actually said in the episode, or you did, but it was part of the conversation. The reasoning for why I struggled with it is because he is the only person on the entire list where every single solitary feat that he exhibits as a leader of the Avengers throughout all of Marvel history, his involvement in Marvel history. He's the only one who every single bit of his feats are caused and created and enacted through his intellect.
Yes, for sure.
They are direct results of his genius.
For sure.
Everyone else, they've got superpowers, and it's a combination of, like with, let's say, Victor Von Doom, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is just a genius and a brilliant mind. However, he is also incredibly powerful. He's got multiple.
He's a sorcerer.
Yeah, he rivals Doctor Strange as a sorcerer, and then he's got super powers. He's got super strength. He's got
he runs a country.
Number of different things. Yeah. But Tony Stark, he is the only one where literally everything he does, he's like Batman in that sense, where everything he does is purely dependent and reliant upon his intellect. So every piece of tech that he uses, every Iron Man armor he creates, every strategy that he forms to be able to not just compete with these actual super beings, but to defeat them, it's all through his intellect. So me personally, I think there's considering all of that, I think there's a really strong argument to be made that he's right there with Reed Richards and Victor Von Doom in intelligence. And I even debated, like, man, is it possible that he's the smartest mind? Despite the fact, you have to take into consideration all the things, which we did, which is why he's ended up at number 3. But it's like, man, you could really make an argument just based on those things alone and feats that he has displayed over his history in Marvel Comics that he rivals Reed Richards and Von Doom for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. But it's one of those things where like, it's like, yeah, you kind of have to choose how you really want to do the list at that point, right? It's like, do you want to do like humans with no technical superpowers, or it doesn't matter if they have powers or not? If they're smarter, they're smarter. You know what I mean? And that's ultimately kind of what we did. It's like, it doesn't matter if his strength or sorcery or knowledge of sorcery elevates him. If he's smarter, he's smarter. You know what I mean? So I guess it really depends how you look on it, because on other people's lists, depending how they format it, we could totally understand if he was, number 1 or number 2 on their list.
Yeah, that's what it boiled down to was, it's like, man, these top 3, you can't fault anyone for placing them in any particular order, because there's arguments to be made for each of them, in my opinion.
Although I don't know about you, I'm really satisfied with number 1 though, because I think even most comic fans would say, yes, Tony Stark is incredibly smart, but Reed Richards is still Reed Richards. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree. And in the end, there's too much evidence also, I would say, that our top 2 are really the smartest. And the arguments for Doctor Doom actually being number 1 are actually pretty impressive as well. So there's definitely reasons why he landed at number 3 on our list, and that's where he remains. But we actually agreed with Marvel on that one because that's exactly where Tony sits on Marvel's list as well at number 3.
For sure. Which is funny. I like how that one worked out, right?
Yeah, we at least agreed on one.
Yeah. 1 out of 10 isn't bad. But also, I kind of like how we totally just, like, we don't really even have to go through 2 and 1 much because we've been talking about it the entire time, comparing it to Iron Man, where clearly they know Doom, Doctor Doom is number 2 and Reed Richards is number 1, which I actually spoiled at the beginning of this podcast. So there's that.
That's exactly right. And I guess a lot of the controversy there too really boils down to the long running debate on whether or not who's number 1 and number 2 between those two, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Fantastic or Doctor Doom. For us, it landed at Mr. Fantastic, but again, you can't fault anyone for choosing Doctor Doom because this is a guy who, from an intellectual standpoint, not just his powers, which he employs in everything he does, but his genius is been shown in the comics to where he literally goes head to head with gods on multiple occasions and wins.
It's one of those things. I would feel like it's almost the same argument we made for our DC version of this list with Batman and Lex Luthor, where they're so close, but it's one of those things where I feel like it's so close because Victor Von Doom doesn't have any limitations. He's a villain, right? So he'll do whatever he has to do.
Right.
Where Reed will not. And I think a perfect example of that is the Maker, who is the Ultimate Universe version of Mr. Fantastic, and he's really prominent right now in Donny Cates' Venom run. And we're seeing how smart and how evil and crazy powerful this guy is with his intelligence. Again, he's literally just the Ultimate Universe version, an evil version of Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic. And that, right there shows you that if, the main 616, Reed Richards, was to go bad and not care, he could use his mind to do some things and, outmatch Victor Von Doom even more so.
I totally agree, and I think it is exactly the same in terms of the comparison to the DC list. It's not a surprise, I guess, that the top 2 characters on both lists, DC and Marvel, are not only a villain and a hero, but they are direct rivals.
Right. Well,
right. So Lex Luthor isn't a direct rival for Batman in the same sense as Superman, but they come in
they fight quite a lot. Yeah, for sure.
They're on opposing sides of, to where in sense of like he goes after the Justice League often in comics.
Well, his leader is a Legion of Doom. Yeah. Lex is constantly in conflict with the JLA.
Exactly. So it's not a surprise there to see that that very strong similarity between the two lists. And I would agree. I think there is a strong argument to be made there that that didn't weigh into my considerations as far as like if he, if constraints were taken off of Reed Richards, would that push him even further in front of Von Doom? Because I think that he has displayed enough to take that number 1 spot even without that. Unlike with Batman, it was like you can't. If you just took it the feats at face value, you would probably put Lex Luthor in front of Batman, right? Because of things that he has done. But the argument on the DC side was purely based on the Batman Who Laughs,
right? And
feats that he's done and where he's beat Lex Luthor, and that was purely the argument there. Short of that, you would probably the stronger argument in my view would be for Lex Luthor to be number 1. Short of that, but with this case. I think Reed Richards has shown enough feats that actually show that even without that, he is of greater intelligence than Doctor Doom.
Which basically just cements it even more so then at that point. It's just solidifying it even more. So what we're saying is this list is correct. No. This is the new official list.
Yeah, we're sitting here going, what we're saying is we agree with ourselves.
No, but these lists are always really fun to, like, any kind of list like this where it is kind of like open to interpretation and people, there's not really going to be a definitive list. Sure, there's going to be, characters that people are always, the majority are going to agree on, but there's always kind of like wiggle room depending on the situation, right? Like even with like fastest character or the strongest character, the smartest, you know what I mean? They're always really fun. We've done most of those already too. So I'm curious to see what else we can come up with, because we've done like the fastest characters. We've done like the most powerful characters in each, Marvel and DC universe. Now we've done the smartest. We've done the best fighters. So, what is left, we'll have to wait and see.
We've even done, We even did not too long ago, actually. We actually did the top 5 mystics.
Yes.
As well.
For sure.
Which was one of my favorites. That's my part of my area of the comic book world that is of particular love.
I don't think we've done the top 10 assassins in each universe, though.
I don't know that we've done assassins or not. I know that we've done fighters.
I know it's kind of gray, right? Where it's like there's going to be a lot of like crossover, you know, where it becomes really similar. But I mean, at the same time, like someone like, you know, Batman is an assassin. He was obviously on our list. Nightwing isn't an assassin. So it would there would be enough difference where it would kind of almost be more villainous, where you would have like Lady Shiva, Deathstroke, people like Deadshot. Like it would almost be like a villains list in that sense.
Oh yeah,
because
for sure.
Good guys aren't assassins. You know?
Yeah, I mean you would have some anti-heroes.
Oh, for sure.
There, like a Deadpool, you know. But largely that would be villains.
Yeah, that could be something that pretty fun down the line to do that. Plus that's just a cool title. I like just like, you know, coming up with episodes off of cool titles. It's like the top 10 assassins. Like it just sounds good. I feel like that's how Stan Lee came up with names. He's like, you know, he's like Roachman. No, how about Spider-Man? That'll sell. Spider-Man.
So in the future, if you see us get banned by YouTube, you know why.
Are you saying that's not going to play well with their algorithm? The top assassins, the top people that will kill you dead.
Yeah. In current atmosphere, I'm not sure what's going to happen there. We may get flagged. We'll be like, listen. It's comic book assassinations. It's not real.
I think we've done the top 10 sidekicks too, right? I don't even remember.
I don't know. Man, we've done so many things. It's hard to remember them all, but I don't know that we've done sidekicks. I know fighters is definitely one. Sidekicks, I want to say that we did do sidekicks at one point, but I can't remember off the top of my head. You know what? I think we did do a small list of sidekicks many years ago.
You know what we have to do that I just came up with, and there's more than enough versions of them to do it? The 10 strongest Hulks.
Oh, now you're talking.
Because you got the Red Hulk, you got World Breaker Hulk, you got Smart Hulk, you have Maestro Hulk.
Yep.
There's so many versions.
Especially now with Maestro coming out. Maestro #1 dropping.
There's so many. That could be a fun one.
I'm all over it. Let's do this thing.
Curious to see where Joe Fixit, the Bouncer Hulk, lands on that list. He'll throw you out of a club. He'll do it.
If you think that we're going to make that list without having the world's only pimp Hulk in there, you're crazy.
But I think that brings our podcast to a close. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think we've got about covered it, and I think we've done a good job of informing everyone of why Mr. Fantastic is #1 and why Marvel's list is wrong. So there we go.
Yeah, why they're wrong and we're right.
That's right. Marvel, if you're anything like DC, you know, that means you're listening. So now you can update your list.
We're definitely going to get a letter.
Oh, man. Well,
on that note, we'll talk to you guys next time when we talk about all things comics.